What would you do if speaking up could cost you everything? I'm not just talking about embarrassment or rejection. I'm talking about your life. Would you stay quiet to survive, or would you dare to speak for those who can't? This is the story of Esther, not a warrior, not a prophet, not a queen by birth, but a young Jewish orphan girl living far from home, in exile under the mighty Persian Empire. She didn't grow up in privilege. She didn't train for influence. And yet, God was quietly positioning her for a moment that would change everything. Because sometimes, the people we least expect are the ones chosen to stand in the gap. Esther's journey began in the shadows. Raised by her cousin Mordecai after losing her parents, she learned early what it meant to be overlooked, unseen, unimportant in the eyes of the empire. But something was stirring behind the scenes. One day, Queen Vashti, wife of King Xerxes, refused to appear before him and his nobles. Her act of defiance caused a royal scandal, and in response, the king issued a decree. She was banished, and a nationwide search for a new queen began. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a political move. Young women from all over the empire were taken, yes, taken, to the king's harem, including Esther. Imagine that. You're a teenager, ripped from your home, forced to compete in a twisted beauty pageant for the favor of a foreign king. You can't say no. You can't go back. All you can do is survive. But Esther didn't just survive. She found favor. Out of hundreds, maybe thousands, she was chosen. The crown was placed on her head. And just like that, the orphan girl became queen of Persia. But here's what the king didn't know. Here's what no one in the palace knew. Esther was Jewish. Her people were scattered, quietly living in exile, often despised, often silenced. And now, one of them sat on the throne. But no one could know. She kept it hidden, just as Mordecai advised, until one day, the silence became a matter of life and death. Enter Haman, the king's highest official, a man consumed by pride and hungry for power. When Mordecai refused to bow before him, Haman didn't just get angry, he got genocidal. He persuaded the king to sign a royal decree. On a certain day, all Jews across the empire were to be killed. Men, women, children, all of them. It was legal, it was sealed, and it was irreversible. Just like that, Esther's secret became her crisis. She was safe in the palace, for now, but her people were not. And in that moment, Esther faced a question we all have to face at some point. Why am I here? Why am I in this position, this relationship, this city, this job, this season? What if it's not an accident? What if I was placed here for such a time as this? There are moments in life when hiding is no longer an option. Esther had tried to blend in, to stay quiet, to survive in the shadows of a golden palace. But then Mordecai, her cousin, the man who had raised her, sent a message that shattered the silence. Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? It was not a command. It was a calling. Esther knew what was at stake. If she approached the king without being summoned by Persian law, she could be executed on the spot. Unless he extended the golden scepter, her life would be forfeit. And yet, she answered. She told Mordecai, "Go. Gather all the Jews in Susa. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will do the same." And then she said 12 words that shook heaven and earth. If I perish, I perish. Esther wasn't reckless. She was resolved. And on the third day, clothed in royal robes, but walking in the strength of prayer and courage, Esther stepped toward the throne. Can you imagine the silence in the halls? Every eye fixed on her, every breath held. And then the king saw her. He paused, and slowly he raised the golden scepter. She had found favor, but Esther didn't rush into accusations. She was wise. She was strategic. She invited the king and Haman to dinner. Not once, but twice. She created space. She built trust. She waited for the right moment. And at that second banquet, when the wine was flowing and the mood was calm, the king leaned forward and asked, "What is your request, Queen Esther?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." Esther looked him in the eyes. She took a deep breath, and then she spoke. "If I have found favor with you, O king, spare my life and the lives of my people. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king's face changed. Shock, confusion, then rage. "Who is he?" the king roared. "Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther turned slowly to her left, and with unwavering calm, she said the name. An adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. The room exploded. The king stormed out in fury. Haman, trembling, fell at Esther's feet, begging for mercy. But justice was already in motion. When the king returned, he saw Haman groveling near the queen, and it sealed his fate. One of the servants stepped forward and said, "There is a gallows, set up by Haman himself, 75 feet tall. He built it for Mordecai." The king replied, "Hang him on it." And so, Haman was executed on the very structure he had built for another man's destruction. In one day, everything changed. But Esther's courage hadn't just exposed evil. It had shifted the fate of an entire nation. Esther didn't have an army. She didn't have a sword. She had her voice and her moment. And she used both, with courage, with wisdom, and with faith. That single act of courage changed everything. Because Esther chose to speak, the king issued a new decree, one that allowed the Jews across the Persian Empire to defend themselves. What was meant to be a day of destruction became a day of deliverance. Instead of mourning, there was joy. Instead of silence, there was singing. What began as a secret in the palace ended as a celebration throughout the nation. And to this day, the Jewish people still remember it through the Feast of Purim, a holiday not just of survival, but of purpose, not just of rescue, but of remembrance. Because one woman, young, orphaned, exiled, overlooked, refused to stay silent. And that tells us something powerful. God doesn't always choose the loudest voice or the strongest hand. Sometimes he chooses the hidden one, the quiet one, the one who didn't think they had a voice at all. And he says, "I've placed you here for such a time as this." Esther didn't wake up that morning with certainty. She didn't have the whole plan figured out. She didn't know what the king would do, but she knew who she was. And more importantly, she knew whose she was. She belonged to a faithful God, and that was enough. Her famous words echo through time. "If I perish, I perish." Not a cry of despair, but a declaration of surrender, a bold, beautiful trust in God's greater purpose. So maybe you're watching this and you feel like Esther, small, invisible, torn between comfort and calling. Let me remind you, you don't have to feel ready to be used by God. You just have to be willing. You just have to show up. Because sometimes history is not changed by armies, but by a single voice, a voice that speaks truth, a voice that speaks up when everyone else stays quiet. So here's the question I leave you with. What if you were placed right where you are, not by accident, but for such a time as this? Don't underestimate your voice. Don't wait for a perfect moment. Speak, act, pray, stand. You may be the Esther in your generation, and the world may never be the same because you said yes.